We are back at Anime Lockdown. Thank you so much, Obi-Wan Shinobi. We will see you again in an hour, but until then, we are joined by Samantha, and I hope I'm saying this right. Is it Ferreira?
Yes, it is.
With Psychic Song Girls and Super Robots. Welcome to Anime Lockdown.
Basically, thank you for having me here. And hello to everyone at Anime Lockdown. Welcome to Psychic Song Girls and Super Robots, a Sakura Wars Retrospective in Hot Blood. So, this is basically going to be well, I guess I should start from the beginning. My name is Samantha Ferreira. I am the editor-in-chief of Anime Herald and the Comic Review, and I know a thing or two about Sakura Wars. Anyone who's followed me on Twitter knows that I'm basically this person here, only 20 years older and way less cute. So, I have a lot to go through today. I'd love to kind of stop and pause, but I'm going to be just flying through. I do apologize. So let's jump right on in. Before we begin, I guess the important question is, what is Sakura Wars? And the dictionary definition is that it's a multimedia franchise from Sega and Red Entertainment, blah, 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 steampunk world of the Taisho version of the Taisho era, where warriors of justice work under the veil of secrecy to fight against demonic coma, and to do so, they work in the shadows. They basically enlist combat reviews, which are, covert, quote-unquote, groups of psychic-powered individuals who fight the coma in steam-powered super robots while working at the same time in a performing troupe undercover. The idea is to banish the darkness and fill people's hearts with light. And this is a very heavy Takarazuka influence. In particular, it borrows heavily from like the Shotoku review, the OSK review, the Takarazuka review, because Oji Hirai's aunt was actually a founding member of the Takarazuka review. And it's something that's always kind of stuck with him. And at the same time, this idea of the review, you would see it kind of spider right through Sakura Wars. Things like, say, the various divisions, like the Flower Division is typically the lead division of Takarazuka, the Wind Division of the Moon Division, things like that. And this would actually also play very heavily into the casting decisions. In particular, Hiroi was looking for actresses who, and I quote, would speak as if they are singing. So he was looking for people with a melodic tone of voice to them. And more so, the Grand Imperial Theater, where much of the first game takes place, and pretty much your base of operations in any of the Taito games, is modeled after the Shotoku Review's original theater, to the point where it's actually in the same spot in Ginza that the original theater stood. And there's a bit more to the Takarazuka thing. Historically, the Shotoku Review and the Takarazuka Review were big rivals back in the day, back when Shotoku was still a thing. And the Shotoku Review's flower was the Sakura, while Takarazuka Review claimed the Sumire as their own. And you can kind of see that in their iconography, their emblems, things like that. And this really did play out in the games, as the top star of the Imperial Combat Review was Sumire Kanzaki. And she very, very quickly formed a rivalry with Sakura Shinguji. So you had Sakura and Sumire kind of butting heads from the very beginning. Kind of like this.
Sakura-san, 人の着物の裾を踏みつけるなんて失礼じゃありませんこと。すみません。まったく、これだから田舎臭い人は嫌ですわ。そやでお下品で。さあ、もう一度初めから行くわよ。あら、ごめんあそばせ。このガキ、さくらさん、口で言ってわからない人はこうよ。
So yeah, don't worry. They're fine. They're fine. Anyway, it's a big franchise. I mean, since its debut in 1996, the series has spawned 6 mainline games, 15 spin-offs, 6 OVAs, 11 manga and light novels. I mean, you can kind of see the list here. 2 anime series, a movie, 20 dozens of mobile games of various states of completion. I could actually make another panel completely about those. 20 high-profile stage shows, more than 75 original albums of music. I mean, this is a huge franchise. And it's also given us one unforgettable theme song. This is going to be stuck in your head for the next week. You're welcome. And honestly, I guess the best place to start now would be to kind of give a brief overview about what the games are, kind of fly through the rest from there. So let's start with the games. So really, what is a Sakura Wars game? On paper, it's billed as a quote-unquote dramatic adventure. And in plain English, this basically blends elements of classic adventure games with another type of gameplay, whether it's strategy like we saw in the first 5 games, or action, or some of the spin-offs you had. You actually had a Kimi Ariga Tame on the DS, which was a dungeon crawler. And for the most part, these games are structured a lot like a typical anime series, with chapters being treated as episodes, complete with like eye catches, chapter commercial breaks, and actually next episode scenes. So it's very much paced like a TV series. And Oji Hiroi has long said that he would like the experience to be like playing an anime. And really, that said, it's very close to a slice of life anime in a lot of ways, because most of your gameplay, about 70% of any Sakura Wars game, is in the adventure mode. So that's about 70% of your typical game. You explore the world, you wander around the Imperial Theater, or Tokyo, or New York, or Paris, or wherever you are. You bond with your team, like the Baragumi. You meet very interesting people, like the Baragumi. And generally, this is where like 90% of your plot revelations happen. This is where your conversations with your team members happen. This is where all your big twists and turns happen. And generally, it just keeps going from there. But when push comes to shove, you do kind of have to get in a room. And a lot of the conversation is actually driven by the LIP system, which is short for Live Interaction Picture System. This was created strictly for Sakura Wars as a means of basically engaging people in this adventure mode a bit more deeply. So most people know this as the timed conversations like you see here, where you have a series of options and a little timer ticks up, and if the timer's out, you either kind of derp out or you just don't answer. But there are numerous other types, like the click lips, where you use to examine scenes or people. There is the the action lips, which was basically a QTE. And in one of the games, a spin-off called Mysterious Paris, there was a shooting lips, which was basically a rudimentary version of Lethal Enforcers in a lot of ways, like very rudimentary. And that said, when push comes to shove, you do have to get in a robot. I mean, you're not going to be shooting your car. You're just going to get in there and get your job done. Get in a robot, fight the demons, protect Tokyo, Paris, New York, the world. Historically, these were handled as a strategy affair, with the first 2 games being tile-based strategy, kind of like a very rudimentary Fire Emblem. Later games adopted what was called the ARM system, which is a bit more interactive, and it was actually evolved to be used in Valkyria Chronicles back in the day. The newest game, Sakura Wars 2019, I'm just going to be calling it that for clarity's sake. It's just Sakura Wars typically, but conflicts. Was actually a full action system based off the Hedgehog engine. And funny enough, this actually brings things a lot closer to Hiroi's original goal of playing an anime, because it gets people right into the thick of things and into that action. They kind of experimented with this with another game. It just didn't work out so well. All right, with that out of the way, let's kind of take a run through the anime. It's otherwise known as the Sakura Wars Cinematic Universe, except, not really. Basically, the anime series, there were 6 OVAs, 2 TV series, a movie, and I'm just going to give a quick once-over on these just to kind of explain what they are. So starting off, the earliest was Sakura Wars, the Gorgeous Blooming Cherry Blossoms, which first launched in 1997, ran for 4 episodes through 1998, and ADV Films released this in North America in 1999, I believe. This was actually a prequel to the first game, and it kind of tells the story of the combat reviews for the Imperial Combat Reviews formation. So you got to see how Sakura learned her Okahoshin. You got to see how Sumire helped to basically create the Kobu. You got to, with Kanzaki Heavy Industries. You got to see Kana run off to avenge her father. You got to see Koran with a giant bazooka. I mean, this was a lot of lore, and it was actually a celebratory OVA because at the time, Sega and toy producer Bandai were in talks to merge, and this was actually supposed to be the first of several planned works as a kind of way of showing a unified front. But unfortunately, that didn't quite happen. Due to the valuation at the time, I actually had the figure right here. It is about $1 billion Sega was valued at the time. Bandai kind of got cold feet and backed right out. And this just never happened, unfortunately. However, the OVAs proved to be popular, proved to be a success, leading to a second set in about a year after the first OVA finished, called the Radiant Gorgeous Blooming Cherry Blossoms, or Sakura Taisen Goka Kanran. Now, this was a 6-episode OVA, and this was a bit more of a slice of life series. It focused more on the characters after the Imperial Combat Review was formed, and during / immediately after the events of Sakura Wars 2. So you had characters like Rennie come in. You had Orihime. You had Kaede Fujieda, all really kind of interacting as the team worked more together. So these were more laid back episodes, kind of let the cast breathe. You had like the team shooting a movie and having to deal with a ghost. You had Maria having to deal with a gang of people from her past. You had I should slow down a little. You had Iris stealing Dandy's boat and going for a joyride. On that note, this actually really brought the Dandy Gang into the world of the mainline series. And it became kind of a big part of the stage shows as bit players, and they've pretty much been in every single one since. Then came 2000. The good times were not meant to last. Sakura Wars TV aired in 2000. This was a 25-episode series that was a loose retelling of the original Sakura Wars game with elements of Sakura Wars 2 thrown in for good measure. Ryotaro Nakamura, who is best known for Serial Experiments Lane, actually directed this at Madhouse. And Satoru Akahori wrote the script. This was a much darker experience, a much more low-key, subdued series than the rest of the franchise. So you didn't have as much of that camp, as much of that absolute violence that you'd see beforehand. Sadly, this is actually the most available adaptation on the market today, because Sentai just released this on Blu-ray about a couple years ago. Thankfully, better times were to come, though. In 2001, as part of the Sakura Taisen 2000 project, they unveiled Sakura Wars the movie, which was actually meant to be a bridge between Sakura Wars 3 and Sakura Wars 4's original concepts. This opened just before Christmas in 2001. It was directed by Mitsu Hongo at Production IG, and this actually got a limited theatrical release in the US as well. Pioneer released it in 2003, gave it a one-night showing in specific venues. And nowadays, Funimation has it available. This actually introduced the New York Combat Review, Reggie Altair, and it set up a lot of the backstory that would become kind of the basis of Sakura Taisen, Saraba Hitoshiki no Ya. Sakura Wars So Long My Love. In 2002, though, the Imperial Comic Review would be saying goodbye to one of their most ardent members. Michi Tomizawa, who played Sumire Kanzaki, announced that she would be retiring at the end of the year from the franchise. And to kind of celebrate and give the character an actual send-off, they produced a one-episode OVA in addition to a stage show, Sakura Taisen Sumire. This was animated by Radix once more after the stints with Madhouse and Production IG. And seriously, if you want a good cry, if you really want to cry, watch this. It is such a touching send-off to the character, and it's hard to leave this without a little bit of tears for me. Going forward, in 2003, a year later, Sakura Wars was pretty much constant for quite a while. So, as you can tell, these are like boom, 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 rapid fire. As soon as one ends, the next one comes out. But in 2003, it was the Paris Comic Review's time to shine with Sakura Taisen Ecole de Paris, which was actually written by Hiroyuki Kawasaki, who wrote the scripts for Irresponsible Captain Tyler. And it told the origin story of the Paris Combat Review. It's definitely not as strong as the previous entries, but it introduces Erica, Glycine, Lobelia, Koklika, Hanabi, the entire crew that you really got to know and love in throughout Sakura Wars 3. And a year later, in 2004, this was actually never released in North America, but Sakura Wars Le Nouveau Paris, which is actually a sequel to Sakura Wars 3. This is basically telling the story of what happened after the events, after Ogami went back to Tokyo, before the Paris Comic Review would head over there for Sakura Wars 4. And honestly, it's a shame this never came out, because this was actually a much more lively, much more enjoyable experience than Ecole, with some great character moments. Speaking of great character moments, Sakura Wars New York, New York was the final Sakura Wars OVA to be released in 2007. This was a 6-episode OVA that was directed by ICOT's director Ryuji Kimura at AIC. This is a direct sequel to So Long My Love, and actually used elements that were cut from the original game, revolving around Cleopatra and some of the events going on. And honestly, this was one where the cast was allowed to get really just campy and fun There we are. And just kind of let it fly. This was very much Petite Mint's time to shine, so to speak. They really got a lot of use out of Shinjiro's alter ego on this. But after that, there was no actual animation until last year, when Sakura Wars the Animation debuted, which was directed by Sword Art Online Alicizzation's Manabu Ono at Sanjigen. Funimation currently holds it right. They produced a dub for it, and it is fabulous. Definitely check it out. But after playing Sakura Wars 2009, because this is a direct sequel, they do not really skip a beat. They expect you to know what's going on there. At the same time, this is also the first dubbed Sakura Wars project since 2010, so it's kind of a landmark in that way. All right, so with the anime out of the way, let's kind of dive into the stage shows, which is taking us from the silver screen to the limelight. With the success of the first game and the second game, Sakura Wars took the stage in something called a Kaio show. Now, these are slice of life anime in live action with original soundtracks, plays. They're super campy. They're super amazing. And I mean, you really can't explain these too well without having to see one. But typically they were shown in two halves, one of which focused on some sort of misadventure. Basically the cast doing something, whether it's trying to write the play they're actually going to be starring at afterwards. Or in one of them, I believe this was Hakenden. I could be wrong here. But Sakura ends up in jail. And the second half would usually see the cast act out classic stories like say Ayuani, Sea God's Villa, Les Miserables, Benito Kage, or some semblance of them like we saw with Shin Takurajima. But anyway, the best way to kind of introduce these is to show you. So before we do that, you're going to hear the word mambo a lot. Every time you say the word mambo, every time you hear the word mambo, I want you to just stay in the chat, put a clap emoji, whatever.
私が行きますから。
じゃあ私も行ってきます。
ちょっと行ってきます。
お早くね。はい。ね
えねえねえ、これ食べてもいい？
ああ、今新しいの出させますよ。
いいよ、これでもったいないもん。
召し上がれ。いただきます。おいしいよこれ。あなたはきっと素敵な女性になるわね。
これうまいな。
コーランさんは可愛いわね。
よかったわね。私は
大人の魅力ですか。
どうぞ。ありがとうございます。ねえ、しみれ？しみれはどうしていつもカンナと喧嘩ばっかするの？それはきっとカンナさんが私のトップスターとしての輝きに嫉妬なさってるからですわ。それは違うと思うよ、すみれ。いいえ、そうに違いありません。あの方も女性です、一応。でもいつも男役ばかり。以前マリアさんがさくらさんのお衣装を着られたように、いつか自分もと思ってらっしゃるのですわ。でももしカンナさんが私の衣装を身につけたとしたら、隠す女心、ほっといた奥の気むずれがあなた Sumire. 笑いすぎ。
All right, yeah. So the Kaido shows they're something else, and honestly, they kind of have their own lore, their own character arcs. Half the time, half the people on it are drunk. Mayumi Tanaka is usually doing whatever the heck she wants. You really have to see them to believe them. They are just so fun, so campy, so silly. And the Kaido shows have actually been running for quite a while. The major Kaido shows ran from 1999 to 2011, with the last big show being accepted as commonly seen as Sakura Wars Budokan Life 2, Taito Party, New York. And however, though the major Kaido shows ended shortly after this, they never really did kind of go away. Chichi Yokoyama, the Dandy Gang, and a rotating cast of players actually perform an annual show at an event that's staged by the Ueno Tourism Board every year. Like this still here was taken from 2019 before COVID set in. And that said, more recently, we've seen a new generation of Sakura Wars stage shows. In particular, Sakura Wars The Stage was originally announced in 2019. Unfortunately, it was delayed from a March 2020 opening to November due to COVID. And this was a two-part performance, much like the previous ones. The first act was a retelling of the events of the first chapters of Sakura Wars 2019 with a little extra lore built in. The second act was a concert that featured songs from the franchise. And unlike the original Kaido shows, Sakura Wars The Stage uses a dedicated cast of stage actors, which, for better or worse, is probably the best course of action to take. There are stories from the various interviews with the original cast that discuss what it was like to do the show, the albums, the anime, the stage shows all at once, and it was to the point where it was stressing them out. Like Chichi Yokoyama, who plays Sakura Shinguji, was to the point where she was actually losing her hair at points. So this is probably the best way to go. And they actually were popular enough to get a second event in just March. Sakura Taisen The Stage, Okanu Udage, was held at Tokyo's Hulk Hall for a one-day event. This featured songs from the franchise, plus a brand new piece written specifically for the stage cast. And this was, I'd say, where the stage floor division really came to their own, earning their own combat review uniforms, as you can see right here, which are just, they're so bright, they're so flashy. Otoko Yaku, Anastasia, just looks great. It's amazing. Anyway, time for something completely different. In particular, I'd like to kind of go through a brief history of the franchise because this is very windy and interesting, and there's a lot to it. Because this actually began in 1990. The series was the brainchild of Oji Hiroi, who before Sakura Wars was best known for creating Far East of Eden in 1989, which is actually like a cultural icon for classic gaming in Japan. The first inklings of this idea came out after Hiroi went to see a performance of Shanghai Rhapsody, which, as you can see with the poster here, it's a very big, brassy, fun musical. And he actually wrote a treatment for this project, which drew heavy inspiration from Shanghai Rhapsody and shows of its ilk. He shopped the idea to publishers and kind of put out some design docs, which were unfortunately shot down. The idea was shelved. But Hiroi's not a man to sit idle. He went to work on numerous other works, including co-writing Samurai Crusader with Ryuichi Ikegami, working on Tenga Makia 2 Manjimaro, which launched on PC Engine in 1992. The guy kept very busy. That said, in 1993, Sakura Wars would actually return to the forefront of his mind when he was working on the Tenga Makio Ziria Oborohead OVA. At the time, he was placed with a little-known composer named Koi Tanaka. I mean, he's only done a couple of little shows, stuff like, say, One Piece, G Gundam, Pat Labor, minor stuff. Anyway, Hiroi was so moved by Tanaka's work that he wanted to make a musical around his compositions. He wanted to really just put something about it front and center. And a year later, fate actually intervened when Hiroi was contacted by Sega's vice president, Shoichiro Irimajiri. Irimajiri specifically was looking for Hiroi's studio, Red Company, to make a game with a quote-unquote popular mascot character for the Sega Saturn. And Hiroi was actually reluctant at first. He needed some time to really kind of think about it and kind of hem and haw. But he ultimately used this as a way to kind of pitch his idea for Sakura once again. And after some consideration, he invited Irimajiri to a Saipan for a 2-week retreat. It was there that they kind of bonded with some key members of Red, and Sakura was hitched to Irimajiri during a week. And it was actually approved almost on the spot. Let's see. And this was actually presented as a tabletop game. Before it became a game treatment, they created a tabletop game codenamed Sakura, and a second iteration codenamed Sakura 2. They basically would borrow mechanics heavily from Fire Emblem, which was like red hot at the time. And it's red hot now anyway. But anyway, definitely no way to guard back then, but you know, to kind of sell this point to them. And as you can see here, these are some early concepts. Tsuruya is the original concept for Sakura, who was at the time named Sakura Saijo. And with the agreement in hand, they actually contributed some. A scroll of poetry was the first thing contributed to the project by Hiroi. And with that in hand, they began work. It was to be an adventure game with strategy battles. And at this time, this is where Hiroi really nailed down that phrase, like playing an anime battle. And basically, through it all, Hiroi wanted to create a version of the Taisho era that was undaunted by the Great Kanto earthquake, to basically create a time when, if, say, Japan were allowed to just keep innovating, keep moving forward, which would give way to the steampunk innovations that we saw in Sakura Wars. And the project itself became a co-production between Red Company and Sega R&D 2, which attracted a fairly interesting staff. On music, you had Kohei Tanaka. For the original character designs, you had Kosei Fujishima, who at the time was best known for Arrest and Oh My Goddess. For in-game character designers, they had longtime partner with Fujishima, Hinori Matsubara. And for the scripts, they had Satoru Akahori, who wrote, say, Samurai Pizza Cat, Store Hunters, Tekken Blade at the time. He's done a lot since then. I mean, you can't throw a rock without hitting Satoru Akahori. And anyway, the game was actually a bit behind schedule. It was delayed before making its way to retailers on September 27th, 1996. So this makes it the 25th anniversary of Sakura Wars this year. And the game was an instant hit. It earned high praise in Game Magazine, sold super well in its first week, with 205,270 units hitting customers' hands, and numerous retailers reporting sellouts. It would go on to sell more than 300,000 copies through its lifetime, becoming one of the best-selling games on the platform. And this is like huge. So I want to just kind of go through this. This was like the foundational work. This would introduce the world, the cast. It would lay the foundations for every single future installment. It would create the human coma conflict that still exists today. It introduced us to Ogami, who would become the derpy blank suit character that we kind of know and love today. And if you can look in the top left, this is actually translated to English by fans last year. So I can't put a link here, but check it out. Anyway, with the success of the first game, Sega and Red immediately began work on growing the brand. A sequel was immediately greenlit, and numerous core staff members were brought back on the project, and Production IG was brought on to produce the cutscenes this time around. So they took a really big step up in the audiovisual department. So for this game, things like, say, the lip system, the battle system, they're all beefed up in a big way. This was meant to be a bigger, badder game that would really, really show what the team could do. And it brought in like new characters like Soleta or Hime and Renny Milstras. And I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, the game would actually launch on April 4th, 1998, less than 2 years after the first game. And it would sell through 355,000 units week one, which is like more than 70% of its launch shipment. And it would move on to move 500,000 units in Japan, become the best-selling game in the franchise to date, and the fifth best-selling entry in the series. Sorry, the fifth best-selling entry on the game on the Saturn period. That was a mistake on the slide. And this would actually close off the story that began in the first game. It would bring in it would make some big improvements that kind of helped to even out the process. It would introduce color coding for emotions. It would bring in new lift prompts, and I definitely am repeating myself. So anyway, with that in mind, in April 2000, Sega announced the Sakura 2000 project. Now, this is something that became almost iconic for the franchise because this was an attempt to really, really usher the Sakura Wars world into the new millennium. And it was meant to be huge. Like, this was a way to welcome the Dreamcast in a lot of ways because it includes Sakura Wars 3, Dreamcast ports the first two games, Sakura Wars the TV series, Sakura Wars the movie, a 3-part drama CD, several stage shows, and a lot more that would be announced at the time. And speaking of Sakura Wars 3, this actually began planning during the development of Sakura Wars 2. And this would be a joint work between Overworks and Red Entertainment, which would make a big overhaul to the franchise DNA. I mean, this would bring in the ARMS battle system. This would enhance the list prompts. It would introduce an all-new combat review with the Paris combat review, where you'd get Erica, you'd get Lubila, you'd get Hanabi. I mean, it just expanded the scope of the world in ways that I can't even begin to describe right now, because this was the one where it kind of said, there is something bigger out there. There's something greater out there, and we're going to explore it. And it was a critical and commercial success. I mean, this launched in 2001 to critical acclaim, sold through 2,016 copies week one, 304,000 lifetime. It became the 7th best-selling game on the Dreamcast and received ports to PC and PS2. And originally, this was intended to launch a series of games which would see Ogami traveling the globe to check in on other combat reviews. So you actually saw the seeds of this get planted with Sakura Wars the movie when they announced New York, because it was originally supposed to be Ogami heading to New York, but there were other plans, unfortunately. We'll get into that in a few moments, because Sakura Wars 3 was the most transformative entry in the franchise that date. introduced some things that are still used today. The Kinematron or Teletron in the new game. It introduced the arms battle system, which was later evolved to become something used in Valkyria Chronicles. It introduced Analog's lips. It introduced full screen CGs, which is a first for the series because previously they kept them all in like little window boxes. And it's the first game to really let people explore outside of the theater. Unlike the first two games, this one gave all of Paris as kind of a playground for players to explore. All right, looks like something was out of order, but anyway. So anyway, as I was saying, they had a lot of plans to go with, and unfortunately, sleeping late wasn't one of them.
おはようおはようボンジュールおはようおはようボンジュール大神さん大神さんおはよう大神さん早く起きてよボンジュール今日も元気にボンジュールくるくるくるくるくるくる回ってボンジュールボンジュールボンジュールボンジュールおはよう大神さん Hey!
Thank you, Erica. Because in 2002, Sega would release Sakura Wars 4, Maidens Fall in Love Maidens. It was actually developed in 10 months because this was meant to be a swan song for the Dreamcast and a farewell to longtime series producer Norishi Oba, who was there since the first game. It was a much shorter game with 3 acts as opposed to 7 or 8 full-length episodes. However, it had a staggering amount of endings. I mean, this had like, I believe 11 endings or 12 endings, if I remember correctly. So what it lacked in length, they made up for in replayability. Anyway, there was no time to really... Here we are. Before I go further, though, this was another one that was received very highly by Famitsu. Sold more than... It was the last game before the newest one to feature a Sumire Kanzaki in a major role. It sold through 257,000 units week 1, becoming one of the strongest sellers on the system. And it was actually picked as the top game in the series by Famitsu fairly recently. But anyway, Hirai had bigger plans. He had his sights set on the world. In 2002, July 1st, 2002, Hirai announced that he wanted to bring Sakura Wars to a global audience. He announced the Sakura Taisen World Project, which would bring 7 games to the world, which include a remake of the first game, because they felt that it was the one that needed the most work, the most improvement since its initial inception, and Sakura Wars 5, which was So Long My Love. At the event, Hirai was quoted saying, "Today is the dawn of a new Sakura. I'm convinced that as director of Sakura Wars, I am confident that the series can be accepted by people around the world." And among the games announced, I mentioned Sakura Wars in Hot Blood and Sakura Wars 5, but there was also Sakura Wars 5 Episode 0, an action prequel to the So Long My Love. Sakura Wars Mysterious Paris, Mysterious Tokyo, which were spin-offs that would follow a pair of detectives, and several games that sadly were not released. In particular, there are 3 games that we know that got the axe. Sakura Wars Mysterious Tokyo Capital, which would be a sequel to Mysterious Paris in a sense, as it would follow the same group in a mystery in Paris, in Tokyo. Sakura Hime Nishika Emaki, which was meant to symbolize Sakura Taisen World Project's purpose in broadening the time and space of the series. This would be set during the Sengoku period, so the 1400s to 1500s. 1467 to 1568. That's all we really know. And a game called Coma. Now, this is the one that hurts the most because this was a direct prequel to Sakura Wars. This would be a game that would follow the original Anti-Coma Squadron. So that would be Yoneda, that would be Ayame, that would be the original, the OGs. And it's something that they constantly referred to in the first games, but kind of left it almost like a Star Wars-ish lore type of thing where it always hinted at something much bigger. So it does kind of hurt that this one never got produced. Anyway, Sakura Wars in Hot Blood was a remake of the first Sakura Wars with new cutscenes and a new ending. It was a ground-up remake, which basically took everything from the first game, completely brought it into the new engine, and adopted the new battle system, added new story chapters, and a new ending. And unfortunately, several of the mini games were brought out to become cell phone games, which was kind of a loss. Let's see. And however, the biggest one to come from this was Sakura Taisen 5. Saraba Hitoshiki no Ya. Sakura Wars 5, So Long My Love, which shipped in 2005. July 7th, 2005. So about 20 years ago now. Exactly 20 years ago now. Sorry. 16 years ago. My brain's not working tonight. It was the first game to feature a non-binary main character in Subaru. It was the first game to not star Ichiro Ogami as the lead because the duties were passed on to Shinjiro Taiga. And this was actually an ambitious title. It was originally planned to be 11 chapters, but due to time constraints, it was cut down to 8. The side story that focused on Cleopatra was actually made into the OVA series that would come immediately after. And despite strong reviews, this was a retail disappointment with the lowest sales in the franchise, and it still sits there to date for mainline games. It sold through 112,000 units week 1 and 144,600 copies in its lifetime. However, which is a shame because this was a great refinement of what worked in 3 and 4. This enhanced the battle mode to bring in a new mode for aerial combat. This brought in a new action lips for QTEs. This fleshed out the adventure mode to include more landmarks for people to visit. It basically gave us a much bigger, more robust system that we saw in 3 and 4. And it was actually the first game in the series to come west. On March 30th, 2010, NIS America released the title in North America and Europe as Sakura Wars So Long My Love. As part of this release process, NISA commissioned a brand new dub, which brought in a lot of great actors like Laura Bailey for Gemini, and a ground-up bespoke port for the Wii by Idea Factory, which surprisingly was never released in Japan. And though it was reviewed highly, unfortunately, it was a sales disappointment in the West. NASA announced that it sold over 10,000 units, but that's where they left it. And Haru Akanaga, president of NAS America, has quoted to Silicon Era, "It's also tough to localize Sakura Wars because of the huge amount of text. It took more than 2 years to complete the localization. That's more than the development time in the Japanese version. So things could have gone better." Yeah, the last game in the series up to after Sakura Taisen So Long My Love was a DS game, a roguelike pseudo sequel, Sakura Taisen Kimi Arugatame, which came and went pretty quickly, pretty much quietly. That said, a lot of us at the time kind of expected to be, just another franchise that was just gone, unfortunately. So honestly, there was a lot of shock going around when this series was unexpectedly revived in 2019. Also, I love that artwork. Anyway, at Sega Fest 2018, Sega announced that a new Sakura Wars was in the works. And CEO Haruki Satomi confirmed that would be quote-unquote more than a game. A year later, Sega filed for an English language trademark for Sakura Wars. And Sega of America released a survey that included the English titles of all 5 titles. A first time for the company to ever do so, to ever acknowledge that these games existed. On March 29, the title was officially announced as Shin Sakura Taisen. A little over an hour after that reveal, trailers dropped around the world for this, confirming that it would be the first game to launch roughly contemporaneously with the Japanese release. It would be a few months later, but fairly close. And for this one, this new game would bring in a brand new dream team. Kohei Tanaka, who is basically Mr. Sakura Wars at this point, would return to the project as a composer. And Tetsuya Tsubo, who directed, say, Skies of Arcadia, Hatsune Miku Paradiva, would direct this, with Taito Kubo and Masashi Kudo coming to design the characters, taking over the team of Fujishima Matsubara, along with several guest characters, including Bun Bun, Noise Ito, Shigenori Sojima, Yukio Haraguchi. I mean, this was like an all-star team, along with the scenario by 428 Shibuya Scramble writer Jiro Ishii. And really, what a wild year. This was a year where we had a manga, a novel, an anime, a game, all announced, along with a stage show. I mean, this was like, we ate very well in 2019 as fans. And not only that, but the entire run-up was preceded by this intense series of live streams, bring in Katana producer, bring in this wonderful panel of dorks here, along with numerous co-bring events with, say, Super Robot Wars Omega, Star Wars Ocean Amnesis, Puyo Puyo Quest, along with some real-world sponsorships of the Akibio Electrotron Winter event and Wendy's meals and a cafe in one of the Sega arcades. So, Sakura Wars 2019 officially debuted on December 12th, 2019, and sold through 140,000 units in its opening week, 166,771 lifetime, and pushed franchise sales past 4 million. The game was received well, won the Future Visual Award at the 2019 Japan Game Awards. And it was basically a soft reboot, bringing the series to 1940. So while the events of the first 5 games did occur, the original combat views were lost in the Second Great Como War. The years in about 10 years beforehand. The Imperial Combat Review had fallen on hard times and was on the verge of closing until Seijo Kamiyama, a disgraced Navy captain, was tasked with leading this new division to restore the group to their former glory while protecting the capital, while also dealing with challenges from other combat reviews that had sprung up in the meantime. So basically, this was honestly the Sakura Wars 2019 is the best sports anime with mecha that I've seen in a while. And it would make its way to the global audience on April 20th, 2019. It was the first in-house release for the series, as previous entry had been shipped out to NIS. And it was actually translated by the acclaimed Inbound Games, who held the Yakuza series. Unfortunately, we have no clue how this sold just yet. Sega hasn't announced official numbers, but I would love to hear it. That said, that's not all for the series. In August 2020, Sega and Delightworks unveiled two projects, Project Black and Nippon.com. About a month later, on September 2, the veil was lifted on both projects during a live stream, which were revealed to be the same project, Sakura Revolution of Maidens in Bloom. This was set in Taisho 100, more than 60 years after the events of... decades after the events of the console games, and told the story of an entirely new crew. For this one, Hololive was listed as being an official supporter, with specifically naming Hosho Marine and Shirakami Fubuki as official VTubers for the title. They would actually were supposed to be included as characters in some way before. Well, I'll get into that, sadly. And really, this was just a rolling Katamari of dorks. I can't say this enough. This was just a delightful, delightful experience with players taking a new captain, who's only known as Shide, basically. And they have a name, but it's always Shide, who would lead an all-new Imperial Combat Review as they travel across Japan to liberate the nation from the Great Imperial Combat Review Black, who had taken over fascistic rule over the country, while meeting and recruiting new members in something that I can only describe as a rolling Katamari of dorks. Like, seriously, they are just so dorky. Look at these. I love them. They are my awkward queer children. I love them. And while it did launch strongly, it was actually the most downloaded Android game in December 2020. Things didn't go so well. In their annual shareholder meeting in March, Sega confirmed the game launched strongly, but saw slowdowns following the months. And about a month later, it was announced that Sakura Revolution would shut down, citing difficulties in the market. In particular, they didn't say it out loud, but they strongly hinted it was due to COVID-19. The final shutdown date is July 20th, 2021, and a group of fans, including several members of the Taisho Cafe Discord group, and myself, are working to preserve and archive this game for future generations before we can't do that anymore. Anyway, unfortunately, sadness aside, the series does celebrate its 25th anniversary on September 27th. A new Kaiosho event, Sakura Wars Summer Festival, Wars Hanano Senshi Kai, will be held on July 18th. This will star Shizuya Yokoyama, Mayumi Tanaka, and the Danny Gang. And also a new concert series actually just announced a couple days ago. I didn't have time to update the slides, but at the same time, Sakura Taisen the Stage will return in winter 2021 for a third show, Shin Sakura Taisen the Stage, Okana Utige 2. And we keep hearing from several people to kind of keep our eyes open, so we don't know what the future holds, but hopefully it looks pretty bright at this point. There's still a lot going on. There's still a lot of potential to be had and a lot of hope. Anyway, that brings us to the end. Wow, just about a minute left. So if you have any questions, normally I'd love to take them, but I know I'm like kind of bumping right up against the time limit. So feel free to poke me on Twitter or visit the Combat Review, visit Anime Herald. If you ask me questions on Twitter, I'll do my best to answer what I can. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you about Sakura Wars for the past hour. And I really hope this kind of got you inspired to check out the series.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm really happy that you joined us this year.
Likewise, it was a pleasure to take part. Thank you for having me.
Well, cheers. You have a good night.
You too, have a great night.